Welcome back to AR's Tales, aka the A.R.T podcast. I am A.R. Mirabal, and today I am joined by a returning face and a newcomer. Well, the newcomer to the podcast, anyway. We have him mentioned her a couple times in the previous podcast that we had with Collective Tales. If you haven't listened to it, I definitely recommend that you get onto it. But today we are joined by Jonathan Reddoch and Jen Ellwyn. How are you guys doing tonight?
Great.
Pretty good.
Awesome. They came to talk to us a little bit about their next book. I'm going to let them do the whole introduction. It is a spiritual sequel to the first Collective Darkness. It's another one, it's another flash fiction, but this one is also going to include poems. So it's going to add some poems and flash fiction into an anthology. Excited to talk about it, excited to hear about it, and very specifically an audio book version of Collective Tales getting finished up and finalized, and they're here to talk to us about that. So, without further ado, could you talk a little bit about the coming products that you have, the new site of what's coming on?
Yeah, so we have three things coming out. Well, three or four things coming out this year. So the next thing that's coming out, we don't have a date set, would be the audiobook for Collective Darkness. So that's our book that came out last fall. It was an Amazon bestseller, and we've been working on creating an audiobook, and Jen knows all the details of that. And then next we have The Darkness Between, which is, like you said, kind of a spiritual sequel to Collective Darkness, which comes out September. And that's going to have flash fiction and horror poetry. And then after that, in November, we have Collective Fantasy coming out, which is our fantasy book.
Now that is
And
awesome.
and then
I'm sorry.
I was going to say, and since we're talking to you, I do want to mention we also have Collective Visions, which will be the following spring, and you're going to be in that one, and that's our sci-fi book, and we're actually still open for submissions on that one, so we need people to submit, and we have other open submissions too. If anyone's a writer, they should definitely go to collectivedarkness.com/submissions and check out what we have open.
And I definitely would recommend. I'm over the moon to be excited onto that project. So if anybody is listening that they have an idea that they're passionate about, send it over. Might as well just throw in a hat. I did not expect to be selected either, believe me. So you never know.
No, your story is really good. I liked it a lot. We both did.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, going on to that, Jen, you were actually in the first Collective Darkness, and you're also going to be a part of this Darkness in Between, right? Correct?
I don't know yet if I'm part of the Darkness Between. I haven't gotten an email yet, but I was for sure part of the Collective Darkness, the first one. And I'm also the audiobook engineer. So that was a really fun project to get hired for. And I love making audiobooks. I have a extensive background in theater and film and all things technical and creative. So it was a joy to work with Jonathan and Elizabeth and make that audiobook.
Wow, now that's really interesting. So for the is flash fiction more of your shtick, or is that more of just a thing that you threw together but you mostly focus on novelizations or Wattpad or whatever it is?
Yeah, usually I write scripts, but the past couple of years I joined a local writing group, and one of the writing groups had a horror fiction, a short story contest, and so I just wrote something, and I got accepted in that, and then Collective Darkness came along, and I just started writing a few more short horror stories. But what I'm working on right now are a few novels, so kind of a little bit of everything. I'm a Jane of all trades, or a Jen of all trades.
Well, that's awesome. Well, without spoiling too much of what your story got into, without dropping any big plot points, could you speak a little bit about what your short story was about in
Collective Darkness?
Yes.
Yeah. So that one was called Poltergeist, and it was about a boy who sneaks into an antique shop to try to steal a vase, but he's not alone in the shop. He has Mary, another little girl, in there with him, and a few shadows come into the picture. And it's a very spooky, kind of intellectual, psychological thriller. So I've gotten a lot of good feedback on it.
Now that I like a lot. So it's something that Oh, go ahead. Jonathan, what is that thing that
Oh,
you
this
have in
is
your hand?
another book she's in, The Witching Time of Night. And
Yes.
I have a copy. I haven't read it yet, but I'm excited to. And
I
actually,
knew your name looked familiar. This was in the research of the first podcast. Yes, I remember all
oh
this
yeah,
stuff.
because Elizabeth is
Yes.
also in this one too. So you probably
Yeah.
might have.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one's a really great one too. That one has a lot of different stories. That one has 19 authors, I think, in The Witching Time of Night. And Collective Darkness has 12 different authors, 12 different short stories. So they're perfect short reads to read in the middle of the night or right before bed if you want some spooky dreams. And I really enjoy those books.
Yeah,
You can
and
actually get both of them signed on our website too.
oh, definitely. Well, drop. I should have done this in the beginning of the podcast, but for the people just listening in, where can people find you? Websites, everything. Drop it, please.
Well, collectivedarkness.com is probably the best place because that's where our submissions are. You can buy signed copies of our books. Um, and then, it's also available on Amazon and the usual bookstores and things like that.
Jen.
Yeah, my site is just jenellwyn.com, and I have a newsletter there that you can join. I just need your name and your email address, and I'll be sending out notifications as soon as the audiobook for Collective Darkness is live. And you can find more of my short stories there, and some of my upcoming novels will be posted there too.
Now that's interesting because for my newsletter, I usually require a name, email, blood sample, mother's maiden name, uh, social security number, and none of that
Firstborn child.
yeah. None of that last 4-digit stuff. I want the full thing. Last credit card I
Well,
used, address, the game.
I don't think I'm gonna join your newsletter.
That's not fair. That's not fair.
Sorry.
Well, something that you touched on a little bit, and it's something that I am genuinely very interested in, any author, any person that is a fan of horror, is what is your concept of horror? It's something that I talked about. I know with Elizabeth and with Jonathan last time that we spoke, but to me, horror is more of like a concept thing. Like the thing that scared me about Freddy when I was a kid wasn't the claws or like that idea. It's more that he could attack you in your dreams, like the place that you're supposed to be safe and like cuddly, and that's supposed to be your escape. Like if you when you see the monsters at night and you're not sure what's under your bed, you go to sleep and that's your safe space. And he could go there. That was the fear. So to you, what is horror? What is the thing that really because I know the moment you said psychological, like I immediately thought of Shutter Island and all these like crazy things. So to you, what is your heart of what horror is?
For me, I always thought I wrote dark fantasy, and then it took someone in our writers group in the League of Utah Writers to actually stop me and be like, no, this is horror. You're writing suspense thriller. And I'm like, oh, I guess I'm writing suspense thriller because I don't necessarily focus on monsters a lot. The story I have in The Witching Time of Night called The Figment is about a monster, but that was my first attempt at a monster story. But usually I enjoy stories that are about the darkness within ourselves, which is a great segue to The Darkness Within, which is the next horror anthology that's going to come out from Collective Tales Publishing. But like some of my favorite horror movies aren't necessarily like Children of the Corn or Saw or those conventional horror movies. I really enjoy the others because of the twist at the end. It makes you just need to watch the whole movie again because there's a whole new perspective presented to you. And I really like that kind of twist. I like a lot of Christopher Nolan's movies because they make you think and they're difficult to comprehend. And once you comprehend them, you have to watch them again and again to really soak in all the messages he has to offer. And yeah, so horror to me is just an exploration of the darkness within ourselves.
That's really good because I think if you take that definition, that ideology, you can basically make any movie into a horror depending on how you like want to think about it. Like if you just got out of like a bad relationship, you can easily look at like a horror movie. I mean, like a horror movie. You can translate a romance movie into a horror movie, and like that whole like idea of, oh man, that's beautiful. Right now, I'm watching Mr. Robot, and
Oh yeah.
that's not. And I don't know how they do it, but they manage to get you to make you feel creepy. I don't know how
Yeah,
they do it, but it's not horror related at all. But they make you
exactly. It's
feel
not
uneasy.
it's not necessarily branded as a horror show, but that same kind of feeling of uneasiness and of inner reflection and of doubt and moral dilemmas and love. I love that stuff.
No, yeah, it's absolutely enamored by it. And well, another thing that I'm really interested in, just in general, is you were talking about that the audio engineer. How can you explain a little bit of what that entails? Are you like, taking two speakers
Yeah.
together with a wrench? Are you? How's that going?
Sometimes I do have to smack my computer with a wrench to get it to do what I want it to do. We call it percussive maintenance. Um,
Yes, I'm aware.
but no, I've gotten a lot of questions about what exactly is an audio engineer, because when people listen to books on Audible or books on tape, it's always, oh, someone wrote the story, that's the author, someone published a story, that's the publisher, and someone narrated it, that's the voice actor. But oftentimes the person who voices the story isn't necessarily tech savvy, and that's totally fine because their craft is very much using their voice like an instrument, putting energy into it, putting characterization into it, and that's an actor's craft. But from just working with a lot of actors in the theater and the film industry locally, they don't always necessarily know, oh, what is EQ? How do I balance my frequencies? How do I cut out this background hiss? All the technical stuff that's involved recording video or audio. Where I come in as the audio engineer, and I take us up to broadcasting standards as far as exportation goes. And then to also for audiobooks specifically to make sure it fits the ACX requirements, which is the website where most audiobooks are submitted to, and then published on Audible and iTunes and other websites.
Because I do remember just from my very, very, I mean, we all have like a little thing of getting like really into music in high school. It's like, oh yeah, I'm gonna be the next XYZ. So I remember from my days of doing that, I remember the audio engineer was the person that just fixed like the well, I can't say just because it's kind of like a good editor. Whereas like you think like, oh, they just did X, but then you realize that without that thing, it sounds significantly worse. But to me,
Mm-hmm.
the audio engineer was the person that always fixed like but man, I can't remember what the term of it, but when you like the drum sample, when like there's like, oh, the pop, there it is.
Yeah,
Or just like
pops and noise and mm-hmm.
and artifacts, and like I can't remember if I'm using the right terminology for
Yep,
that too.
yep, that's correct.
So I'm
Yep,
assuming
and it's actually a language too. The more you do it and you look at the frequency, the spectral rate, you can actually see where all of the consonants are, where all of the breaths are, where a T or a D is. After editing so many audio clips, I can just visually read the frequency map and be like, oh, right, there's a pop. And then I listen to it. Yep, that's a pop, and I edit it out. So it's kind of an art in and of itself, but I enjoy it a lot.
Jesus, you are an ironclad champion for that. I can't. I mean, I did the main reason I don't edit this podcast is because I tried doing it for my first podcast and lost my mind.
Oh no.
I think it took me 36 hours, I'm not kidding, to edit like an hour and 45 minutes of like I recorded, and it was serious. And exactly what you said when I got towards like, the tail end of it is not a lie. I could see where I was gonna just like how the waves go up and down. You can see
Mhm.
that's where I said this, that's where I said that. It becomes a little easier to kind of like cut and choose. And I can see over
Mhm.
time how you could like just like nail it in, but there's no way I was gonna focus my time into that. I was like, all right, all right, all right. We're doing
Yeah, yeah.
unedited.
It's crazy. And especially for audiobooks, I'm a really thorough person. I'm an all or nothing person, and I'm a thorough, slow and steady wins the race, take your time kind of person. Sometimes that bites me in the ass when I have a deadline. But I really like, I follow along with the book, and every single word I read along, and I make sure every single word is accurate because it has to be. And the reader deserves to have the same experience that the listener does, and vice versa.
Yeah, I mean, without a single doubt. Without a single doubt. Now, Jonathan, how is it kind of helming all this together and kind of sewing? Because I know you and Elizabeth are doing everything you're doing with Collective Tales as a collective. So, I mean, kind of a little redundant there. But how's that going?
Good. You know, I mostly focus on marketing and finding authors and working with them. And I don't know anything about the audio side or anything. So like, well, it's a lot of it's about finding the right person for the job. And Elizabeth and I both run our company, and so I mean, we're the only owners, but we have a lot of people that we work with. I mean, we say Collective Tales because we kind of think of us as a group of people that come together.
A
We
collective.
want to publish anthologies, but it's really just about managing a bunch of different things at once. Like, what do you call it, balls in the air kind of thing. So at any given point, we have, let's see, we have the audiobook that Jen is in charge of right now. I'm trying to get the ACX to finalize with it, and then we've got we're doing most of the final edits on the Darkness Between, so wrapping those up. We saved a spot for Jen, so we're gonna stick her in at the end because she was working so hard on the book, uh, the audiobook. And then we're still working on edits for the fantasy book, so we're getting those back. We sent first drafts, and then I think second drafts. I think we're on the second or third round now, and hopefully we're going to be getting we're reviewing submissions for three other books that are in some level of submission process. So we got Visions, and we got Chaos, which is a dystopian one, and then we've got a charity book, which is Collective Humanity. And so we have submissions coming in from all three, so we're sort of like just balancing all these different things. And then we also do a lot of interviews like this, and we spend a lot of time on Instagram talking to people and selling the book, and just taking care of a lot of different things.
I mean, yeah, definitely. It's something that it's one of the double-edged swords of kind of the whole indie market, whereas that you have the control over everything, and that's like really exciting for some aspects, but then you can really feel the pressure when, well, the
Oh,
pressure's all around. It's not even a specific day or time. It's just always there.
and then we also we got supposed to be doing writing too. I think so. My partner Elizabeth, she's very um, rigid. She has her schedule every day, and she's really good about writing every day. And I'm so bad at it, but I still manage to find some time to write when I can. And I have a couple things that were accepted recently into a couple of places. So
Illusions of no, man, what
no,
was it?
no,
Say it.
yeah. Illusions of Grandeur.
Illusion of Grandeur. Yeah, where's that at? I remember we talked about it last time.
That's my Instagram handle. It's a reference to the novel I've been working on for like
Yeah.
15 or 20 years. I don't know. And I will eventually finish. It's like 700 pages long now, but sci-fi novel.
Oh wow, I want to read it. I'm excited.
I can send you like a little excerpt.
Hey,
It's
we talked about it last time. I was like, yeah, without a single doubt. Where is that at? I want that.
Yeah, let's
I
do it.
should be editing. I should work on it, but it's like it should be a priority, but I'm so bad about it because I have all these other things that I'm always working on.
Well,
And what we do spend a lot of time is like filming content for social media. So Elizabeth reads all these books. She reads like 4 books a week, and then I help her film reviews, book reviews, and then she posts them. And then we make all these TikTok videos. I don't know if you've ever seen them. We post them on Instagram and little reels, and they're like way too much work for what the payout is, but they're kind of fun. So
I mean, that's all. That's the heart of it, right? I just like, I mean, today I had a really. I mean, this is gonna be so quick. It's gonna almost make my head spin. This morning I had like a 4 hour like meet and everything, and at the end of it, it just made me realize like how much I'm absolutely just enamored with with what I'm doing. It's even the annoying things, so you can still find like a little bit of pleasure in, and even and the exact thing that you talked about. It's like, man, what am I even gonna do with 3 hours? Just doing the math out of it's like, what's happening? But then you love it, and then it's just like you get to talk with awesome people, and you get to interact in ways that you otherwise wouldn't have the means to. One thing that kind of immediately kind of grabbed. So you said that you're working on a couple novels yourself, right, Jen?
Yes. And that's
Steampunk,
me
right?
jumping around like Jonathan, swinging balls. between, okay, which one should I focus on now? Okay, which should I focus on now? So eventually some of them will be done. I do actually have a set schedule in place for a steampunk fantasy that I'm really excited about, that hopefully I'll be finished with at the end of this year.
Could you give us a little teaser? Or what's going on?
Yeah, absolutely. So this steampunk fantasy would be primarily based off the conflict between magicians and humans and magic versus technology. And it would start with a girl learning that her father has magic, and they go on a journey to escape some humans that are chasing them. And then she herself learns she also has inherited magic from her father. And she actually goes on a quest to rid herself of magic because she just wants to be normal. And there's a lot more to it, but that's kind of in a nutshell what that story would be about.
Man, I like that a lot. You know, what's weird is that I even think my answer has changed since the last time I talked to Jonathan. I have never really been that much of a fan of magic. Like for example, I never read Harry Potter when I was young, and even that show, The Magicians, where I liked it for certain aspects of it, but there were a lot of things that also took me away from it.
Mhm.
But I don't know why, as of lately, especially I think with the more I like study history and kind of let my mind just kind of like, there's certain points in history that it just kind of makes sense that people would have like gotten to such a far degree that they would have maybe tried to jump into something like that. So when especially when you start getting into like all the Salem history and all those things, I don't know.
Mhm.
I had never really gotten into that history before. So now that I know a little bit more about it, magic seems a lot more cool. And I even have a couple like things that I'm kicking around, but still, it's my heart is in sci-fi, so I don't really know how to play around with it. How do you play around
Yeah.
with the idea of magic?
Um, I was never really a sci-fi person. I'm not a huge fan of Star Wars. I probably like Star Trek better. I know.
Hmm.
I'm sorry. I'm a Trekkie. But I was always more of a Lord of the Rings fantasy person growing up. I think mostly because of my dad. My dad was a huge like dragon fantasy nerd. So that's kind of how I grew up. But I also didn't really read Harry Potter growing up. I'm used to magic being a very sparse thing in fantasy worlds,
Hmm.
not necessarily a big prevalent thing like in Harry Potter. Most of Harry Potter is about the magic. And so what I hope to achieve with this steampunk fantasy coming out is that magic is a crucial plot point, and it does affect a lot of the characters and their decisions and the way the world works and the way the technology is in the world. But the story is more so about moral dilemmas, moral conflict, um, relationships between races and countries, and a lot more of a adventure dealing with relationships rather than necessarily a I have magic. Here's let's learn how to use it and let's fight a bad guy at the end of the story kind of traditional route that a lot of fantasy books go to.
You ever see Legend of Korra?
Yes,
Yes.
Legend
Oh
of
my
Korra and
god.
Avatar.
Yeah, like look, because they're like Korra is like that's like a steampunk world for sure.
A
Damn, you
little
got
bit.
You get
me. That's good.
you got the cars and the flying dirigibles and all that stuff.
Oh man, you got me.
Yeah.
That actually was gonna lead me into my question was like how do you treat steampunk? Is there a method? Is there what is the reason for the world being in kind of a steampunk era?
Yeah. I've always been fascinated with steampunk because I really like old technology, like the Wright brothers' first airplane and Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison and the first like inventions of the Industrial Revolution.
Interesting.
I think that was just a huge turning point in our history, in
The
our own
cotton gin.
world. Yeah, yeah. Yep, and the spinning jenny and all those. Like that was my favorite part of history class, in school, was learning, oh wow, this is when all these like the typewriter was invented, the radio was invented, the telephone was invented. So I've always really liked that period in history of invention. And steampunk is just kind of a genre where it takes a lot of aspects of the Industrial Revolution, mixed with a little bit of fantasy, mixed with a little bit of sci-fi, mixed with the Victorian era style of the top hats and the long coats and the ruffly dresses and the high laced leather boots. And it's just a very aesthetically appealing genre to me, and I think to a lot of people. And it's also interesting in the fact that it as a genre itself is kind of inventive and new, and more people are learning of it, writing books about it, doing TV shows about it. Like it's a genre in itself that's new, whereas sci-fi and fantasy, romance has been around for a while, and that also I think is really interesting to me.
Man, if I can be honest, I was almost about to say that it's actually really Jonathan, you really hit that nail right on the head because I was about to say, other than what maybe Wild Wild West, I can't really think of much steampunk things, but Legend of Korra is really a phenomenal example because it's steampunk by textbook definition, and it is phenomenal. One of my favorites.
You ever see what's that show? It's on Netflix. It's I think it's called
The Golden
Disenchantment.
Compass.
Oh, the Golden Compass. Yeah,
Golden Compass is
Oh,
canonically steampunk.
yeah. And have you ever seen Disenchantment?
Mm-mm.
It's by like Matt Groening. It's kind of like Simpson style, but
Oh, yes,
it's
the animated
fantasy.
one.
So the first season is just strictly fantasy, but then I think it's either the second or third season. Maybe they like there's another land they discover that's like steampunk land basically,
Hmm.
and so they like mix magic with them, and they're like, "What? Magic
Yeah.
isn't real and stuff." It's really funny.
man, that is awesome. Especially when you consider like how interesting because I like one of my favorite things is when people make like a fictional world that's based very almost parallel to ours, where they say like, all right, this one incident went different is the whole reason why our parallel kind of makes sense. So I like the idea. I've heard it kicked around I think twice in like different plots and different stories. Bless you. Was that the whole idea of if alchemy came about instead of science, how instead of like our fascination with scientific experiments and vials and all these things, instead of that went around the same path that we were already going with the transmutation of gold, and if we actually were able to find a philosopher's stone and all those things, it's very interesting topic. And actually it's a movie that we talked about last time we spoke, Jonathan. As above is so below. The whole thing
Mm.
is that she finds the philosopher's stone through the notes of Galileo Galilei. Man, I don't know. There's something about history and how it intertwines with like fiction that to me is just like it's one of my favorite parts about it. Like in Percy Jackson, when they talk about like how the connection to holidays, certain things all line up and coincide with one another. One of my favorite aspects of it. So, what do you think is next for you two after with the great things you've done with Collective Darkness and the darkness in between? What do you think is coming up? Do you think there's a third anthology short story flash fiction poem coming up? Do you think you're going to go into a collaborative novel?
Well, I mean, I'd like to finish my novel at some point, and apparently there's some interest there. But yeah, like actually with Collective Fantasy, we were thinking about trying to do a little fantasy, kind of like we did with Little Darkness. So we're testing the waters to see if our fantasy authors are interested in that, and then maybe we'll do like Little Visions and because we have Collective Visions, and then Collective Chaos is the dystopian anthology that we're starting to work on, and then I think what we're going to do is just loop around, and we're going to go back to horror again, and go horror, and then fantasy, and so forth. And we're going to try to have two main books a year. That's kind of our goal, I think, in the future.
2 books a year.
Yeah, two anthology. So we'll do a spring and a. We're going to do like a light one in the spring and like a darker one probably in the fall. So once we get into it, so it'll be like alternating between like sci-fi and fantasy in the spring, and then alternating between dystopian and horror in the fall.
I like that. And the anthology for dystopian, that is Collective Chaos, correct?
Yep,
How's that
collective
coming
chaos.
along?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's way down the line, so we don't really worry too much about it yet. But it is open for submissions. So, and I wrote a story for it that I think is pretty interesting. It's about a were mollusk.
A
It's like a
were
werewolf, but it's a
mollusk.
mollusk.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like a cult, and like they kill this guy, and he gets I mean, I don't want to spoil it, but he gets possessed by a being from another dimension. Like a mollusk type creature. So
That's awesome, actually.
yeah, it's
Yeah,
kind of
I can rock with that actually.
Yeah.
Huh.
For me, I'm gonna keep making more audiobooks and finishing my own novels and writing more short stories, and I'm really excited to see, what's in the future for me too. So, well, we'll see about it. But yeah, if anyone wants to find out more about my short stories, my future novels, my steampunk fantasy novel, or the audiobooks, then yeah, just go to my site at jenellwyn.com, JENELLWYN.com. And I don't know, that's the best way to get notified when new stuff happens.
ooh, yeah. Oh, and I have next month in April, the Unsettling Reads anthology comes out, and I have some poems in there. For I think the book is called Hope Screams Eternal, and then I'm not sure at what point, but in the near future, the podcast, the Night's End podcast, will be they're performing one of my stories. It's the Murder Maze. So,
Well, I think Jen just had to leave us, or
oh,
she just. Well, regardless, I think she.
oh, gotta go. She said.
Well, she already said her little piece anyway, and I'll make sure to edit in her banners. So, any close? You know what? Something that you were thought about you brought up with the whole where mollusk thing kind of made me
Mm,
go into the idea of where werewolves came from, because I love the idea. Usually, I like to play kind of a thought experiment as to how to logically explain a mythical creature. So like you explain how mermaids, mermaids could have been like, some
mm. Like the origin.
yeah, kind of it could have been like some uh deviation in our evolution that from when we turned from apes to being more beach oriented, back erected Homo erectus.
Hmm.
Maybe there was one more kind of evolutionary gap that eventually went into water, and then somehow am I saying that I truly believe it? No, but from an author type of fictional type of standpoint,
Well,
I
yeah.
like to logic that out.
I mean,
Where
if
would
you
you
if you, if you apply, like, I went out, okay, when I make aliens in my like book, for example,
mm,
I try to apply evolution in their world, right? So there should be an evolutionary reason why the aliens have this whatever difference,
yeah, like a big head or some like weird glowy fingers?
Yeah, exactly. There should be like you should be able to scientifically explain, like, this is how they evolved to be this way, you
Mm.
know. So, like, take about mermaids for example. Maybe they started out with webbed toes, and the tribes with webbed toes
I
ended up.
mean, we already have it, the beginnings of it.
Yeah, exactly. And so, like, over time, it became an advantage to have webs. And same thing with your feet. Maybe a webbing between your legs. I don't know.
No, I mean,
Yeah.
like, honestly, because specifically when you think about like how history would have been written, you know, me sending a tweet, you sending a tweet, that's nothing. A person writing something on scripture on stone back then, I don't think it's a little more significant. I think that you would kind of like do it with a purpose. Now, if maybe one crazy guy drew a fresco with a mermaid in it, questionable. The fact that it's so ingrained in like Greek mythology makes me believe that there's
Yeah.
something a little bit more in there that we just don't know. Uh, and again, that's could be just hypocrisy, not hypocrisy. What's the word? Heresy. That could be.
Hmm.
Complete tinfoil head around hat around my head. But again, that's what I like to kind of pursue in writing. Where would you think is the origin of werewolves? The only thing I got is that the origin of werewolves is more kind of like a philosophical thing, like the inner animal that every man carries inside that can be
Hmm.
pulled out from us at any point. But I can't think of anything. Closest thing is like that Doctor Who episode that ends up in a werewolf, where like some aliens that possessed people. Closest logical thing I ever even heard of for
Well, I mean,
werewolves.
I've heard different theories about the moon. So you could start with the moon. So, like, people always say, "Oh, the moon brings out the crazies" or whatever. That's like, but if you think about it plainly, well, when the moon is out, you can actually kind of see. So people are more likely to be out. You're more likely to see other people. You're more likely to go around doing stuff. Before, when there was not the electricity and stuff. So So having people out,
True.
and then I don't know, maybe people are howling, or maybe there are wolves, and people think, oh no, that guy turned into a wolf or something. you know.
You know what? That seems like simplistic, but man, that you might be on the money. Cause because prior to the light bulb, the whole idea of being inside when it was dark out was obvious because that's where the
Yeah.
fires were.
Yeah, and you did not want to get caught outside with an animal or something.
Exactly. So like it would kind of make sense that when the moonlight was out, people feel a little more frisky. They could be out at night. And you know how same thing with how it is. If you go to Boston downtown, well, probably not because of COVID anymore, but prior to COVID, if you went to Boston downtown in 2020, well, 2019,
Yeah,
it
right.
will, people are going to be a little crazier at night. That's just how it is. Like night brings out the kind of, I guess,
Yeah,
the
you're like,
animal in us.
woo, having
Yeah,
fun,
woo! And
screaming, howling.
that's interesting.
Yeah.
And then that kind of just develops into, huh, that is pretty interesting. I really never thought about it like that. Huh.
Plus, let's
Well,
say, okay, here's a theory. Let's say, here's a story you could write. So let's say there's a wild man that lives on the edge of town and he was raised by wolves or something. Well, he's probably kind of afraid of civilization, just like, werewolves kind of stay away from society. So at nighttime, they come close, you know, oh, it's like a wolf man, People see him
oh,
in the
and
moonlight.
and the domestication of dogs, right?
Yeah.
It
Mhm.
must have been like a thing that like eventually like there's a lot to play around with there, huh? A lot to
Yeah.
play around with there.
Yeah.
Well, we're nearing the end of the podcast. There's going to be kind of like a special little short one. And again, if you ever want to come back to shoot more shop with Illusion of Grandeur, go into sci-fi dystopian, all about it. But that's going to be have to be for another time. For
Yeah.
now, do you have any final thoughts? Any closing statements?
Um, no, just find me on Instagram. It's illusions underscore grandeur underscore. And then we're also on TikTok. It's Collector Tales. So we've got all our little silly TikToks on there.
Collective Tales Publishing. Check them out on Amazon. Google them. Editingme.com. That's editing me with two e's.com. And just for confusion, that's two e's on the M,
Right.
not
Yeah.
EEEDIT. So it's editing like normal, MEE.com. Make sure to check them out. They're doing a whole bunch of stuff. They really are a staple in the whole indie community. Check them out. Really have a lot of great authors under them as well as just phenomenal things coming out. A lot of things to be uh what's the word I'm looking for? I was about to say like enamored, but that's not the word. A lot of things to be enthusiastic for, and a
Yeah.
lot of things words are getting messed up in my head. So watch out for them. It's absolutely phenomenal. Thank you again for for coming on the podcast.
Yeah. Thanks.
Uh, yeah, truly, honestly, from the bottom of my heart. And again, thank Jen. So this is the end of the podcast, aka AR's Tales. Please check us out on Wednesday when we have a new episode, as well as Monday. This is the end of the podcast. Peace out.